Hello everyone, this is Mr. Seymour, and we're going to talk about the foundations of the modern presidency today. Now, Article 2 of the Constitution is a very broadly worded discussion of presidential power. But the framers did not anticipate the development of presidential selection via popular election. We do not select our president by popular election. We select our president by what we call the Electoral College. But we participate in a popular election to choose who the electors are going to be. So, particularly in the 20th century, presidential elections have become very tiresome ordeals because the prize is highly coveted, as presidents can wield a great amount of power and influence American politics. So presidential elections have become not a sprint, but a marathon. And we're seeing that happen right now. You have to go through not just the presidential election itself, but you have to go through the party primary process, which is very lengthy and can be very difficult. So presidential elections have become marathons, which is a phenomenon that Barack Obama and Mitt Romney both experienced in 2012. The framers of the Constitution wanted an independent president, but they still wanted one with restricted powers. They wanted a strong president, but not too strong. Article 2 has relatively vague statements about presidential powers. But we've seen the concept of presidential power change over time. The framers did not foresee the leadership implications of the presidency. But beginning with Presidents Jackson and Lincoln, for instance, we saw very strong presidents. And we go on and we look at something called the Whig theory. With the Whig theory, it said that the president was limited or restrained in his office or his powers. And after Jackson and Lincoln, we went to something called a stewardship theory, which was a strong, assertive presidential role, such as Theodore Roosevelt took as well. In the Spanish-American War of 1899 and expanding United States foreign powers. According to the Whig theory of the presidency, the president is limited to expressly granted constitutional authority. Those subscribing, though, to the stewardship theory would call for a strong and assertive presidential role, a presidential view that is prevalent today. This can especially be seen in the presidential theories of Theodore Roosevelt as he took on a strong domestic and foreign policy platform during his terms in office. A strong president is needed in order to respond to national and foreign crises. And the increased policy responsibilities of the executive departments have driven the presidency along. So a large and active government is conducive to a stronger presidency and a weaker legislative branch. The president is the foreign policy leader of the United States. This is a very important role with an important political, military, and economic role in the international arena, With the expansion of the role of the state in areas of economic regulation and social welfare, the president has taken on the role of chief executive and legislative leader, and this has necessarily caused his power to increase. Now, the first role that the president has is commander-in-chief, and under Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, the president is the commander-in-chief of the Army, the Navy, and the United States, and of the militias of the several states. So the president has the ability to commit troops very quickly into a foreign war without much intervention for at least 90 days. And that gives the presidency some power because the president can commit troops, and once they're committed, it's very hard to call them back. his role as chief executive, again under Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, he can require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments. What we're talking about here in this part of the Constitution is what is known as the cabinet. And every president has had a cabinet since George Washington, even though it technically isn't in the Constitution to say the word cabinet is not there. But it is there to say that the president should call upon the heads of the executive departments and get their opinion on certain things. So this is the foundation of what would become the president's cabinet, and every president since George Washington has had a formal group of executive officers in his cabinet. And while the president has the power to nominate candidates to cabinet positions, what really happens is that the Senate has to advise and consent, and that's very important. The president also appoints ambassadors, public ministers, consuls, judges to the Supreme Court, to the inferior courts, those below the Supreme Court, as well as a very large list of other officers. And we can find those jobs that are based upon presidential nomination in something called the Plum Book. We'll talk about that more when we get to the executive departments in the next lesson. Article 2, Section 3 requires the president to faithfully execute the laws of the United States, and it gives the president the power to commit officers into the military, to commission officers into the military. And especially for general officers, this is very important. He acts as chief diplomat. Article 2, Section 2 gives the president, with the advice and consent of the Senate, the ability to negotiate treaties and to receive and formally recognize ambassadors and public ministers of other nations. He doesn't have to have advice and consent for that. So when he recognized Cuba, that really upset a lot of people in Congress. As legislative leader, under Article 2, Section 3, it requires the president to give an annual State of the Union address, and it gives him the power to convene joint sessions of Congress for other purposes that the president might feel necessary. Famously, Franklin Roosevelt declared war on December 8, 1941 in front of a joint session of Congress, and President George W. Bush called a joint session of Congress to get permission to invade Iraq and Afghanistan following September 11th. And perhaps the most important legislative power that the president has is actually found in Article 1, Section 7 of the Constitution, and that is the veto, the power to veto. So in choosing the president, the presidential selection process has involved the Electoral College since its inception. The party convention system and the primary and open caucus systems are also very much a part of this whole process. The presidential selection system has changed, though, from an elite-dominated process to one that is based on popular support and popular consent. We, the citizens, have a lot more say through things like party nomination processes, party caucuses where we go and we participate, or party primaries. The race for the presidential nomination is lengthy and is influenced by several key factors. Because voters pick the party's nominees, the race for president is open to just about any prominent politician who wants to run. But you're going to need the energy, the financial resources, and the desire. So those three things are going to be very important. Now, we have seen like 17 people declare in the Republican side, not as many in the Democratic side. And we also saw Joe Biden just recently, a week or two ago, say that he wasn't going to run. And he did that because he felt that he did not have the energy nor the desire, partly because of the death of his son. The nominating process has grown more democratic. Currently, voters choose the presidential nominee through election of delegates to national party conventions, through things like primaries. You can have an invisible primary. You can have New Hampshire has the first primary. Caucuses, Iowa has the first caucus. And then you have primaries that occur generally in February and March that occur on Super Tuesdays, where we have, like in Texas, we want to front load or go in and elect our nominees early. And we also see the importance of money and the importance of momentum. Money is critically important at this stage, and momentum. And momentum is what we see, for instance, in the in what happened with President Obama in 2008, and right now with Donald Trump. We see momentum, excuse me, as being very, very important. So there were 4 systems of presidential election. From 1788 to 1828, you had your original system where the party nominees were chosen by congressional caucuses. Congress itself appointed the nominees. The Electoral College would and its members would act somewhat independently in their presidential voting, and the people really didn't have much participation at all. Then you started to see party conventions in 1832 to 1900, where party nominees were chosen in national party conventions by delegates that were selected by state and local party organizations, and the people became more involved. The Electoral College members would cast their ballots for the popular vote winner in their respective states, and usually this is a winner-take-all process. So that's where popular election and the Electoral College kind of come together. Now, in your party convention and primary system, that was from 1904 to 1968. This is the same as the second party, the second system, the party convention system, except that a minority of national convention delegates would be chosen through primary elections. The majority were being chosen by party organizations with slaps on the back. After 1968 and 1972, we started to see the open primary and the open caucus. And this is where a majority of national convention delegates are chosen through primaries, as we do today, and most of the people now participate in primary elections, not just a back room full of smoke and mirrors, so to speak, that would select a nominee by just slapping him on the back and saying, "You're my boy." All right. The National Party Convention is used to nominate and showcase the party's presidential candidate. The convention is a major event bringing together the delegates that are elected in the state caucuses and primaries, who then approve a party platform and formally nominate the party's presidential and vice presidential candidates. The vice presidential nominee is chosen at the convention according to the wishes of the presidential nominee. Winning the general election requires winning a coalition that will be built on partnership, partisanship, issues, and image. The general election winner is certain to be the nominee of either the Republican or Democratic Party. We have not had a third party winner since the days of Teddy Roosevelt. Most of the campaigning and advertising is done in what we call battleground states, where neither party has a clear, overwhelming majority. And we're going to look at what battleground states look like in a second here. The most important factor in the election strategy of the Electoral College system, the importance of electoral votes is magnified by the unit rule. Candidates must consider both the competitiveness of a state and the number of electoral votes that are available within each state, and then they decide on which states they want to focus on. So the National Party Convention formally selects the party presidential candidate. The presidential candidate selects the vice presidential candidate. The party decides on a platform, which is what the party stands for or stands on at the National Convention. The party heals wounds and divisions that have occurred during the nominating campaign, and the party presents its candidates to the voters for consideration in a general election. That's the process. Now, money and media have important roles in general elections. You need to, first of all, you've got to have 270 electoral votes in the Electoral College. And because there are 435 congressmen and 100 senators, that's 535. So you need to have more than half of that. And so that becomes 270. The focus will be on battleground states and money. Candidates today base their campaigns around media, particularly the internet and television. Television advertising and televised debates are important and prominent fixtures of presidential campaigns. Due to the recent decline of partisanship in the voting process, voters are now more easily influenced by a campaign's issues, events, and candidates. Partisanship is very important in Congress, not as important in the electoral process for a president right now. Major party nominees will qualify for federal funds for campaign financing, but candidates can decline those funds and self-fund themselves and have fewer restrictions. There are, though, 3 very important qualifications to run for president. You must be at least 35 years old, a natural-born citizen, and a U.S. resident for at least 14 years. But the winners of presidential elections through the 2004 election were all white males. President Obama was the first non-white male to be nominated for president and to actually, to win the presidency. Now, these are our battleground states. Notice the red is a likely Republican state, and Texas is a likely Republican state. Notice the blue are likely Democratic states, which would be in the Northeast and the far West. And then you have your purple. And the purple states are going to be those states that are up for grabs. These are your battleground or swing states. And you're going to see that both the Republican and Democratic nominees are going to focus on those states, which in this case is Maine, for instance, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Virginia, North Carolina, the state of Florida, New Mexico, Colorado, and Nevada. Most of them, though, if you notice, are east of the Mississippi River, and most of them are northeast states. Those are your battleground states. And that's where your candidates will spend most of their time in terms of focus.
I for president, I for president, I for president, I for president. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington. We don't want John
or Dean
or Harry, let's do that big job right. Just get in step with the guy that's left, get in step with Ike. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum, take Ike to Washington. We got to get where we are going, travel day and night for president. Let Adelaide go the other way, we'll all go with Ike. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike for president. Hang out the banner, beat the drum, we'll take Ike to Washington, we'll take Ike to Washington.
Now is the time for all good Americans to come to the aid of their country. Vote for Eisenhower.
Do you want a man for president who's seasoned through and through, but not so doggone seasoned that he won't try something new? A man who's old enough to know
and young enough to do?
Well, it's up to you, it's up to you, it's strictly up to you.
Do you like a man who answers straight, a man who's always fair?
We'll measure him against the others, and when you compare, you'll cast your vote for Kennedy and a change that's overdue. So it's up to you, it's up to you, it's strictly up to you. Yes, it's Kennedy, 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 for me. Kennedy, 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 Kennedy.
are the stakes? To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Sock it to me.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
I believe we need to encourage personal responsibility so people are accountable for their actions. And I believe in government that is responsible to the people. There's a big difference in philosophy between my opponent and me. He trusts government, I trust you. I trust you to invest some of your own Social Security money for higher returns. I trust local people to run their own schools. I trust you with some of the budget surplus. We should help people live their lives, but not run them. I'm asking for your vote. These 4 years have brought moments I could not foresee and will not forget. I've learned firsthand that ordering Americans into battle is the hardest decision, even when it is right. I have returned the salute of wounded soldiers who say they were just doing their job. I've held the children of the fallen who are told their dad or mom is a hero, but would rather just have their mom or dad. I've met with the parents and wives and husbands who have received a folded flag. And in those military families, I have seen the character of a great nation. Because of your service and sacrifice, we are defeating the terrorists where they live and plan, and you're making America safer. I will never relent in defending America, whatever it takes. I'm George W. Bush, and I approve this message.
And if you have any question about what John Kerry's made of, just spend 3 minutes with the men who served with him 30 years.
I served with John Kerry.
I served with John Kerry. John Kerry has not been honest about what happened in Vietnam.
He is lying about his record.
I know John Kerry is lying about his first Purple Heart because I treated him for that injury.
John Kerry lied to get his Bronze Star. I know. I was there. I saw what happened.
His account
of what happened and what actually happened are the difference between night and day.
John Kerry has not been honest. And he lacks the capacity to lead.
When the chips were down, you could not count on John Kerry.
John Kerry is no war hero.
He betrayed all his shipmates. He lied before the Senate.
John Kerry betrayed the men and women he served with in Vietnam.
He dishonored his country. He most certainly did.
I served with John Kerry. John Kerry cannot be trusted.
Swift Book Veterans for Truth is responsible for the content of this advertisement.
I'm Sarah Palin, candidate for governor. Alaska's changed a lot since the days most fireplaces burned wood. Now many of us rely in some way on natural gas, but supplies are low in Cook Inlet. It's time to bring gas from the slope to heat our homes and fuel our economy. It's good business to open gas line negotiations to all viable parties. We need to put new energy into these negotiations to secure our future. We need to put Alaskans first.
It's 3 a.m. and your children are safe and asleep. But there's a phone in the White House and it's ringing. Something's happening in the world. Your vote will decide who answers that call. Whether it's someone who already knows the world's leaders, knows the military, someone tested and ready to lead in a dangerous world. It's 3 a.m. and your children are safe and asleep. Who do you want answering the phone?
I'm Hillary Clinton, and I approve this message.
It shall be known that in 2008 the world will be blessed. They will call him the One.
A nation healed, a world repaired. We are the ones we've been waiting for.
And he has anointed himself, ready to carry the burden of the One. To quote Barack, "I have become a symbol of America, returning to our best traditions." He can do no wrong.
Do you have any doubts?
Never. Can you see the light?
A light will shine down from somewhere. It will light upon you. You will experience an epiphany. And you will say to yourself, I have to vote for Barack.
And the world shall receive his blessings.
This was the moment when the rise of the oceans began to slow and our planet began to heal.
Behold his mighty hand.
Barack Obama may be the one, but is he ready to lead?
Hi, I'm Jeff.
And I'm Meredith. We're trying to encourage more voters from our generation to participate in this historic election. For the first time, our generation could determine who controls the White House and America's future. All we have to do is show up and vote.
If you're looking for some opportunities to get informed, here's some ideas.
Email any of these free videos to your friends or family or anyone else who can help get the word out. And encourage everyone you know to vote. You can also get 2 Voters t-shirts and hats on our website.
Check out a news program on MSNBC called Countdown with Keith Olbermann. The show runs twice nightly. Check your schedule. Olbermann is witty and intelligent, and his news pieces are always thought-provoking.
That's it. Just remember to register by October 3rd, then show up and vote.
I'm going to do something to government. I'm going to make it simpler and smaller and smarter, getting rid of programs, turning programs back to states, and finally making government itself more efficient. I'm going to get rid of Obamacare. It is a moral imperative for America to stop spending more money than we take in. It's killing jobs, and it's keeping our kids from having the bright prospects they deserve. The experience of balancing budgets is desperately needed in Washington, and I will take it there.
I'm Mitt Romney, and I approve this message.
He's Rick Santorum, a loving husband, a devoted father, homeschooler, and a man of deep faith. He wrote the law that banned partial birth abortions, overhauled America's welfare system, and no one has done more to protect America from Iran's growing threat than Rick Santorum. It's no wonder Palin, Beck, and Huckabee are singing his praises. Now it's your turn to join the fight.
I'm Rick Santorum, and I approve this message.
What has Massachusetts given us? A liberal governor who wanted us to believe he is strong on defense. A liberal senator who wanted us to believe he was a man of the people. And a Massachusetts moderate who runs away from Ronald Reagan.
Look, I was an independent during the time of Reagan-Bush. I'm not trying to return to Reagan-Bush.
Romney donated to Democrats, and given the choice to vote in the Democrat or Republican primary, Romney chose the Democrats, voting for a liberal Democrat instead of President George H.W. Bush. Romney opposed the contract with America, raised taxes, and authored government-mandated health care with taxpayer-funded abortions. But now, he tells us, trust me, I'm a conservative. Massachusetts moderate Mitt Romney, he'll say anything to win. Anything. And just like John Kerry,
Laissez-les bon temps rouler.
he speaks French, too.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Mitt Romney.
But he's still a Massachusetts moderate, and a Massachusetts moderate cannot beat Barack Obama.
Made in America. For generations of Michigan auto workers, it's more than a slogan. It's a way of life. But when 1 million jobs were on the line, every Republican candidate turned their back, even said, let Detroit go bankrupt. Not him.
Don't bet against the American auto industry.
Now, a retooled, restructured industry is back because of the grit and sacrifice of Michigan workers.
Don't bet against the American worker.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
Well, it seems like the last couple of elections that we've had have been almost kind of turning point campaigns.
Kind of nervous about it. It's like it's coming. Here it is, 2012, the election.
I think it needs to reflect the changes that we've seen in the last 2.5 years. Then we had an underdog senator. You know, nobody thought that he had a chance. And now he's the president.
I just saw the energy and hope that he had for this country. But even though I couldn't exactly vote at the time, I knew that someday I'd be able to help re-elect him. And that's what I plan on doing.
We're not leaving it up to chance. We're not leaving it up to, oh, you know, the incumbent, the type of thing. It's an election that we have to win.
And unfortunately, President Obama is one person. He cannot go, plus he got a job. You know, we're paying him to do a job, so we can't say, hey, could you just take some time off and come and get us all energized? So we better figure it out.
I can't not be involved. There's just too much that is fundamentally important right now that's going on.
As a community, we all have the same concerns. We all want our kids to go to school and learn. We want them to graduate. We want jobs to be out there. We want people to have homes. We want people to have opportunity.
I don't agree with Obama on everything, but I respect him and I trust him.
There are so many things that are still on the table that need to be addressed, and we want them to be addressed by President Obama.
I had this perception that politics was all show, it was all sound bites, but politics is how we govern ourselves. That's what politics is. And at the grassroots level, it's individuals talking to other individuals and making a difference.
The video that we just saw was actually a collage, if you will, of different presidential general election campaign advertisements. But I want you to see how things have changed over time. And now there's more of a focus on new media, on internet. And there's more, they get a little bit more personal. Also, remember, your super PACs can run advertisements, such as the Swift boat advertisement that you saw. That was run by a super PAC. All right. Now, look at your presidents here. The holding of high office is nearly an informal prerequisite for gaining the presidency. Most presidents have either been congressmen, senators, or vice presidents. Now, few have come in from the governorship, all right? And one came in actually from the Army, which was Dwight Eisenhower. But for the most part, they are a part of the government. William Howard Taft was Secretary of War and a federal judge. Theodore Roosevelt was Vice President and Governor of New York. Woodrow Wilson was Governor of New Jersey. Warren G. Harding, he was also a professor of political science. Warren G. Harding was a U.S. Senator and Lieutenant Governor of his state, which was, I believe, Wyoming. Calvin Coolidge was Vice President and Governor. Herbert Hoover, Secretary of Commerce and War Relief Administrator, so he was a bureaucrat. Franklin D. Roosevelt was a Governor and Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Harry Truman was a Vice President and U.S. Senator, and he got the office of presidency because President Roosevelt passed away. Dwight Eisenhower had no previous office. He was a popular general who led during World War II. And he was a Republican, and people really liked him. It's said, though, that he spent more time on the golf course than he did in the Oval Office. I don't know if that's true. John Kennedy, from 1961 to 1963, was a U.S. Senator. He was also a U.S. Congressman. Lyndon Johnson, Vice President, when Kennedy passed away, when he was assassinated. He was a U.S. Senator. Richard Nixon was Vice President and U.S. Senator. Gerald Ford, Vice President, took over after Nixon resigned, was also came from the House of Representatives, was appointed to the vice presidency. He never actually won an election. Jimmy Carter was governor of the state of Georgia, and he was a state senator in Georgia. Ronald Reagan was governor of California. George H.W. Bush was vice president and the director of the CIA, and he was also an ambassador to China and a lot of things. He was very heavily involved in the government. Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas and was the state attorney general of Arkansas. George Bush was governor of Texas, and Barack Obama was a U.S. senator and a state senator from Illinois. In staffing the presidency, the duties of the modern president far exceed the capabilities of any one person, so a large executive staff is mandatory, and the office of vice president has become more and more important as well. The president's appointment power is very significant. Appointees are important sources of information, and they extend the president's influence into the bureaucracy. The vice president has no constitutional authority of his own. But recent presidents have been giving vice presidents very important responsibilities, executive responsibilities. The executive office of the president, or the EOP, is the president's personal bureaucracy, and it includes the National Security Council, the White House offices, the National Economic Council, and the Office of Management and Budget. Of the EOP's units, the White House office is what we would refer to as the West Wing. Serves the president most directly. It includes the communications office, the press secretary, the office of the council of president, and the office of legislative affairs. These are your direct employees, if you will, of the president. You also have a series of policy experts. Sometimes we call these czars. These are primary sources of knowledge and advice that can be but they can be less politically savvy or loyal than the personal advisors that the president has. The president's cabinet members are important players within specific areas, and the cabinet is a collective decision-making unit. But as a decision-making unit, it is becoming a thing of the past. The president is doing a lot of going rogue on his own, but he still uses his cabinet. The president also appoints and is assisted by the heads of the top executives of all of the federal agencies, which, again, are included in the Plum Book. A president's responsibilities make it impossible for him or her to direct and keep track of the actions of the appointees that carry out in his or her name. Furthermore, the president may not be able to control numerous independent sub-units, if you will. Lower-level career appointees may be captured by their own agency and be resistant to presidential overtures. Presidents have greater responsibility than their predecessors, and because of that, more power. But they must rely on staff who may or may not act in the best interest of the president, and so they have to delegate more power as well. And this is the problem of control. The cabinet is no longer used as the sole advisory body. The problem of control is that at the most severe level is with appointees who work within departments and agencies outside of the White House who are what we call captured into working for the president and may resist overtures from the president as time goes on. Factors in presidential leadership, a variety of factors. A president's natural leadership qualities can vary greatly compared to others who have held the office in the past. The external circumstances that are faced by a president have an important influence on their ability to lead in time of crisis, and presidents can wield enormous influence while the capacity to lead diminishes during normal circumstances. So, that is called the force of circumstance. Periods of presidential dominance marked by special sets of circumstances give the president a decisive elective victory and a compelling national problem. Look at, for instance, Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s. Look at Harry Truman during World War II. Look at Gerald Ford. And look at, for instance, George W. Bush, because he was faced with enormous problems very early on in his tenure as president. Generally, though, the first stage in the president's term in office is called the honeymoon period. We see a lot of success during the first parts of the president's term, and then as we go to the second term, we see decreased successes and more power fights with Congress. So presidents tend to have somewhat more power and influence in foreign affairs than in domestic affairs, and we call that Wadowski's two presidencies thesis. The factors that determine the success or failure in one area are common to both policy areas, both foreign affairs and domestic affairs. So they have to be good at both. And presidents are assisted by their access to information from the executive intelligence agencies, so the CIA and the National Security Organization and so forth. Presidents do tend to be somewhat more power have more power and influence in foreign affairs than they do in domestic affairs. And this, again, is Wadowski's two presidencies thesis. The factors that determine success or failure are common to both policy areas. In foreign affairs, presidents are assisted, and in the domestic affairs, they have to seek domestic policy experts. Acquiring congressional support is essential as the presidency continues past that honeymoon period. Not all presidents possess the political skill that is required to successfully manage the relationship they need with Congress. I would say that President Obama would be in that position right now. While presidents can exercise their veto rights to influence Congress, its use may signal executive weakness, and it can also undermine relations with Congress and cause a fight. So presidents have to utilize their power of persuasion in a system of divided powers, and that's what we have right now. And presidents are more successful if they treat members of Congress as a constituency and respond to their interests and needs. Now, the president who really knew this was Lyndon Johnson. He could get on the phone and he could work all of the different voting portions of Congress in a way that could persuade. The president's power is of course, Congress has the power of impeachment. They can remove the president. Congress can vote on the impeachment part, and the Senate votes on whether or not to remove. No president has ever been removed. 2 presidents have been impeached. And then the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act is supposed to limit the power of the presidents. There have been more periodic collisions between the presidency and Congress, and the War Powers Act is the most significant congressional attempt to restrain the president. This came through in 1973 during the ending of the Vietnam War. It was created because President Nixon was taking it upon himself to bomb areas that were not supposed to be bombed, like Cambodia. Excuse me. The president is to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing armed forces to military action, and it forbids armed forces from remaining for more than 60 days with a further 30-day withdrawal period without the authorization or of the use of the military, and particularly Congress has the power of the purse. But what congressman is going to just leave troops sitting there without funds? So the problem is that presidents have known that they can flagrantly violate the War Powers Act, and Congress really can't do much about it. So there isn't much in terms of teeth. It's been alleged that the War Powers Resolution has been violated in the past. For example, Bill Clinton in 1999 during the bombing campaign in Kosovo, and Congress has disapproved of all such instances, but none has ever resulted in a successful legal action being taken against the president for alleged violations, and they've never recalled troops in a time when the president committed them, because that would be political suicide. That is that would be a difficult decision to make for a congressman. Now, if we look at this particular chart, you'll notice the trend in this chart. Look at the honeymoon period. Look at the honeymoon period, and then look at the number of opposite. You see how things go down? All right. Everything here, for instance, under Kennedy and Johnson was Democratic controlled, and then all of a sudden it's Republican. Eisenhower started with a Democratic-controlled Congress, and then he had a Republican-controlled Congress. So he kind of went against, but still, look at the percentage of bills that are being passed in the way that the president wants them to be passed, and they go down every time. And they usually go to the opposite party. And this is what's happening. What's happening here is that the honeymoon period is lost, and you usually end up with a divided Congress about the midway through the president's term. Now, factors in presidential leadership. One is public support. The president approval ratings typically decrease over time. Part of that is because of the economy. Bill Clinton is very famous for saying it's the economy stupid, and in a lot of ways he was right. The state of the economy, foreign affairs, and then his ability to go public. Going public is very important. But in today's mixed media world, going public is not as easy because we have so many different medium with which to go public. It's not just ABC, NBC, and CBS where you can control the 3 major networks. You have a variety of narrowcasting medium, be they satellite, cable, or internet. And one important thing that the president can do is use this televised presidency to go public and to put a spin on what he wants. Now, who was the master at this? It was President Kennedy, without a doubt. It was President Kennedy. And he really was the first to use the televised press conference to his advantage. Let's look at, in this case, what happens to approval ratings for presidents. You'll generally notice in most of the cases, they will start kind of in the middle. During their presidency, they're they tend to be in the 40s and 50s during the entire presidency. At the end of the final year, they tend to go way down. Like Barack Obama's average has been 47%. His first year average was 58%, and his final year average is about 38%, with very few exceptions. The one exception I want to point out to you is an interesting one, and that is Bill Clinton. Now, the reason this is interesting is because when this 60 here came about, that final year, he was being impeached for the Monica Lewinsky scandal. So his ratings went up during this period of time, not down, partly because of the economy. Now, we also have what's called the illusion of presidential government. The presidents must put their spin on the news to counter negative reporting that is a disadvantage to them. And frequent televised appearances and claims of success add to the belief that the president is in charge of the national government. That's the televised presidency, right? The irony is that the presidential office grows weaker as the number of problems increase. As President Obama's hair has gotten whiter and the number of problems he's had to deal with have increased, his power has decreased. So presidents get a lot of credit when things go right, and they get a lot of blame when things go wrong. And usually by the time they leave, their hair is a lot whiter than it was when they started. And this ends this lecture. It's a short one, and I wish you all well this week as we study the presidency.